I switched places with my abused twin brother on a rainy Tuesday, the kind of rain that makes the world feel smaller and secrets louder. We looked identical, same scar near the left eyebrow, same crooked smile, but our lives had split in opposite directions. I had built mine quietly, carefully. He had married Lena. By the time he showed up at my door, he flinched when I raised my hand to wave hello. I didn't need him to explain. I saw it in the way his shoulders hunched, in the way his phone buzzed and he panicked before checking it, in the purple bruise blooming beneath his sleeve that he tried to hide with a joke. Lena controlled everything, his money, his schedule, his friends, his voice. She told him when to speak and when to apologize for breathing too loudly. She called it standards. He called it love. I called it abuse. That night, while the rain kept time against the windows, I offered the plan. We'd switch. Just for a while. He would take my place, breathe, heal, remember who he was. I would walk into his life and become the man Lena thought she owned. He stared at me like I was insane. Then he cried. The kind of cry men do when they've been silent for too long. 2 days later, I moved into their house. Lena didn't notice a thing at first. She never really looked at him, only at what she could extract. She handed me a list before she kissed me hello. Groceries, chores, apologies owed. I nodded, soft-spoken, obedient. I learned her routines, her tells. The way she tightened her jaw when she wanted a fight. The way she smiled when she thought she'd won. I didn't fight, I documented. Every insult delivered as motivation. Every threat disguised as concern. Every time she moved money between accounts without consent. Every message she sent to his boss pretending to be him. I recorded conversations. I saved receipts. I waited. The first crack appeared when I stopped reacting. When she raised her voice, I lowered mine. When she tried to provoke, I asked calm, inconvenient questions. Can you explain why? Could you say that again? Control feeds on chaos? I starved it. She escalated. Of course she did. She tried to isolate me further, but I reconnected with people she'd pushed away, quietly, politely, with evidence. I began volunteering to handle finances, not arguing, just presenting neat spreadsheets and helpful suggestions. I let her believe it was her idea. Control hates competition, but it adores flattery. By the second month, she was unraveling. She accused me of changing. I agreed. I thanked her for inspiring growth. It made her furious. Then I set the final board. I scheduled a dinner with her parents, her sister, and a mutual friend who happened to be a lawyer. I cooked. I smiled. I let Lena perform. And when she tried to humiliate me, like she always did, I didn't shrink. I calmly played an audio clip. Just one. Her voice, clear as day, threatening to ruin my career if I didn't remember my place. Silence fell heavy. I followed with bank statements. Messages, dates, patterns. Not an attack, an explanation. I didn't raise my voice once. I let the truth do the work. She exploded. That's the thing about control. When it's exposed, it panics. She screamed. She denied. She blamed. And for the first time, no one believed her. Not because I was louder, but because I was prepared. That night, I packed a bag and left a letter on the counter. It wasn't cruel. It was final. I told her I was done apologizing for surviving. I told her the truth would speak whether she liked it or not. I told her she should seek help, not power. Then I went home. My brother was waiting, healthier already, eyes clearer, standing taller in clothes that fit him again. When he saw me, he laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in years. We switched back. He never returned to that house. 3 months later, the knock came. They were both there. Lena looked smaller without an audience. Her control had collapsed, work issues, legal pressure, family distance. She begged. They both did. They said they needed him back. They promised change. They used the word family like a bandage. I listened. I nodded. I let the rain fall behind them like it had on that first night. Then I told them no. I told them abuse doesn't get erased by regret. I told them love doesn't beg after it breaks someone. I told them the man they missed was gone, and the man who remained knew his worth. I closed the door gently. Inside, my brother poured 2 coffees. No flinching, no fear, just quiet strength. Revenge didn't look like yelling or destruction. It looked like freedom. The idea of switching places didn't come from bravery or cleverness, it came from fear. The kind that settles in your chest when you see someone you love slowly disappearing, and realize that waiting will finish the job. When my twin brother stood in my doorway that night, he looked like a shadow of me, same face but hollowed out, like life had been quietly siphoned from him. He kept glancing over his shoulder, even though no one had followed him. When I asked if he was safe, he nodded too fast. When I asked if he was happy, he didn't answer at all. We sat at the kitchen table for hours without turning on the light. He spoke in fragments, as if full sentences were dangerous. His wife checked his phone constantly. She decided which friends were bad influences. She handled all the money because he was bad with responsibility. If he disagreed, she cried. If he pushed back, she threatened to leave and ruin him. Over time, he learned that silence hurt less than resistance. I watched him apologize for things he hadn't done, for emotions he wasn't allowed to have, for existing in ways that inconvenienced her control. That was when the thought surfaced, quiet, terrifying, and stubborn. We were identical. Not just similar, but identical in the way that made strangers mix us up, in the way that had been a joke our entire childhood. We'd never used it for anything serious. But suddenly, it felt like the only move left. I didn't present it as a heroic plan. I told him the truth. I was scared he wouldn't survive another year like this. I told him I could step into the fire for a while, that he deserved air, sleep without fear, mornings that didn't start with criticism. He argued at first, said it was too dangerous, said she'd destroy me. That's when I realized how deeply she'd trained him. He was more afraid for me than for himself. That hurt more than anything else he said. We planned carefully. We traded clothes, phones, habits. He taught me how to walk quieter, how to pause before speaking, how to read the mood in a room like it was weather. I showed him how to breathe without permission. When he left to take my place, he looked guilty, like he was committing a crime by choosing himself. I hugged him longer than usual, afraid I'd never get the chance again. Walking into his house felt like stepping onto a stage where the script had already been written. His wife barely looked up when I arrived. She criticized my timing, my posture, the way I closed the door. And in that moment, I understood something important. She didn't love him. She loved the version of him that stayed small. I told myself I wasn't there to win. I was there to hold the line long enough for my brother to heal. Every insult I swallowed, every command I followed, was bought time. I paid attention to everything, the way she rewrote arguments later, the way she framed control as care, the way she smiled when she felt powerful. Each day confirmed the truth I already knew: abuse doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers until the victim forgets their own voice. At night, alone in a bed that wasn't mine, I wondered if I was strong enough. I wondered if I'd underestimated how exhausting constant control could be. But then I'd get a message from my brother, short, hopeful updates. I slept. I laughed today. I don't feel scared right now. And I knew the switch had already saved him. That first step, the decision to trade places, wasn't revenge yet. It was rescue. It was choosing to act instead of watching someone disappear. And once that line was crossed, there was no turning back. Living under her control was like breathing through a cloth soaked in smoke. Nothing outright killed you, but everything made you weaker. From the moment I woke up to the moment I fell asleep, every action required approval, explanation, or apology. She decided the tone of the day before I'd even spoken a word. A sigh could trigger an argument. A question could be labeled disrespect. Silence meant guilt. There was no winning, only surviving. I learned quickly that reacting was exactly what she wanted. Anger gave her fuel. Sadness gave her leverage. Defensiveness gave her excuses. So I became still, agreeable, unthreatening. I let her believe she'd finally fixed him. That illusion made her careless. She spoke freely when she thought she was safe. She mocked him to her friends while I stood nearby, pretending not to hear. She bragged about controlling the accounts, about how he wouldn't last a week without her managing everything. She joked about checking his phone like it was a cute habit, not a violation. Every word was another thread of proof, and I quietly gathered them all. I documented without drama. Screenshots saved to hidden folders. Voice notes recorded while the phone lay face down on the table. Bank statements emailed to an address she didn't know existed. I learned her schedule so I'd know when it was safe to back things up. I memorized passwords she typed carelessly when she was angry. Control makes people sloppy. Power makes them loud. There were moments I almost slipped. Nights when she pushed too far, when the cruelty sharpened and I had to bite my tongue until I tasted blood. She knew exactly where to press, questioning masculinity, competence, loyalty. She used love as a leash and shame as a lock. More than once she leaned close and whispered threats meant only for me, confident they would dissolve into nothing if spoken aloud. That confidence was her biggest mistake. I kept a mental calendar of incidents, dates, times, witnesses. I noted patterns, how her kindness always followed public embarrassment, how apologies came only when she feared consequences, how generosity was always transactional. I wasn't collecting moments, I was collecting structure. Abuse isn't random. It's systematic, and systems leave trails. She controlled the finances tightly, but she loved appearing generous. That meant moving money around, justifying it later. I asked gentle questions, the kind that sounded supportive. Should we keep a record, just in case? What if there's an emergency? She agreed, pleased by my compliance. I watched as she crossed lines she didn't realize existed. Every transfer without consent. Every forged email, every decision made in his name, but without his knowledge became another brick in the wall she was building around herself. The hardest part wasn't the patience. It was the performance. I had to appear broken in the exact way she expected. Too much confidence would alarm her. Too little would invite more cruelty. I walked a narrow line, pretending to be a man who had accepted his place. Inside, I counted days. Outside, I nodded. Sometimes she tested me, pushing harder just to see if I'd snap. When I didn't, she grew frustrated. Control thrives on reaction. Deprived of it, she escalated, and with every escalation, she revealed more of herself. She sent messages she shouldn't have sent. She said things she'd never admit publicly. She forgot that walls have ears when you're convinced you own the room. I reached out quietly to people she'd pushed away, friends she'd labeled as threats, relatives she'd called toxic. I didn't accuse. I didn't explain everything. I asked questions. Do you remember when? Did this ever feel off to you? And slowly, stories aligned. What I was living wasn't unique, it was familiar. That mattered. Patterns convince where complaints fail. There were nights I wondered if enduring this made me complicit. If staying silent meant agreeing. But then I'd remember why I was there. Every insult I absorbed was one my brother no longer had to carry. Every threat I recorded was one that would never corner him again. I wasn't submitting. I was building an exit he could walk through safely. By the end of the second month, I had more than enough. Not just proof of cruelty, but evidence of control, financial, emotional, psychological. Evidence that didn't rely on interpretation or emotion. Evidence that spoke plainly. She still thought she was winning. That was the cruel irony. While she tightened her grip, believing obedience meant victory, the foundation beneath her was already cracking. I didn't need to destroy her. I just needed to let the truth exist long enough to be seen. And when the time came, I would step back and let it speak for itself. The shift began the day I stopped giving her what she wanted most. Not obedience, not apologies, not even agreement, but reaction. Control doesn't survive on rules alone. It survives on fear, on emotional spikes, on the certainty that a single raised eyebrow or sharp word can bend another person out of shape. The moment I stopped bending, something inside her system started to fail. At first, it confused her. She criticized my clothes, expecting the familiar defensiveness. I thanked her and wore them anyway. She accused me of forgetting things on purpose. I calmly asked her to help me make a list. She picked fights late at night, voice sharpened and ready, and I responded softly, evenly, as if discussing the weather. No sarcasm, no edge, no fear. She didn't know what to do with that. People assume abuse always looks explosive, but more often it's rhythmic, predictable. The abuser pushes, the victim reacts, and that reaction confirms power. I removed my part of the rhythm. The music stopped, and she began dancing alone. She escalated quickly. Calm unnerves someone who depends on chaos. She raised her voice, I lowered mine. She accused, I asked for clarification. She demanded apologies, I asked what specific action required one. Not aggressively, genuinely. Each question was like removing a brick from a wall she'd spent years building. What do you mean by disrespect? When did that happen? Can you explain why that upset you? These weren't traps, they were mirrors. And she hated seeing herself clearly. Her words started tripping over each other. Stories changed. Accusations lost shape when asked to stand on their own. She'd storm out of rooms, slam doors, then return minutes later angrier, not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I hadn't done anything right in her eyes. I hadn't fed the machine. Control depends on intimidation, but intimidation only works when it's believed. I acted as if I wasn't intimidated, not bravely, not defiantly, just neutrally. As if her anger were inconvenient rather than terrifying. That subtle shift stripped it of its power. She began accusing me of being cold, then manipulative, then different. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't been so revealing. The moment she couldn't control me, she tried to redefine me as the problem. That's how these dynamics protect themselves, by rewriting reality. I stayed steady. At gatherings, she tried to humiliate me the way she always had. Little jabs, eye rolls, comments disguised as jokes. Normally, he would shrink. I didn't. I smiled politely. I answered calmly. Sometimes I didn't answer at all. I watched as people noticed. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. Control hates witnesses. She tried provoking me privately afterward, pressing harder, digging deeper. When I didn't explode, she did. Rage without a target turns inward. She said things she couldn't take back. She contradicted herself. She exposed how much effort it took to keep someone smaller than her. The more composed I became, the more frantic she grew. It was like watching a tyrant lose an audience. Orders sounded hollow without fear behind them. Threats landed flat when met with silence. She started justifying herself constantly, over-explaining, backtracking. Power doesn't explain. It assumes. That was the moment I understood something important. I didn't need to defeat her. I just needed to stop playing my assigned role. Control is a performance. The abuser plays authority. The victim plays submission. When one actor exits the stage, the entire show collapses. I didn't argue about money anymore. I asked for transparency. I didn't protest restrictions. I asked for reasons. I didn't defend myself. I asked her to define the accusation. Each response forced her to either admit the truth or invent a new lie, and lies multiply under pressure. She began accusing me of acting superior, which was her way of saying she felt exposed. Calm had become my armor, and she had no weapon for it. She couldn't claim abuse when I was polite. She couldn't claim dominance when I wasn't afraid. All she had left was volume, and volume without authority is just noise. Inside, I was exhausted. Staying calm takes energy, especially when provoked by someone skilled at cruelty. But I reminded myself daily why I was there. My calm wasn't submission, it was strategy. Every moment I refused to react was another crack in the illusion she'd built around herself. By the time she realized something was truly wrong, it was too late. Others had noticed the imbalance. Her words no longer matched her image. Her anger no longer looked justified. The control she thought was absolute had been exposed as fragile, dependent, desperate, and terrified of losing its grip, all because it was no longer feared, and once fear was gone, everything else followed. Once the calm began to unsettle her, the next phase revealed itself almost naturally. Control, when threatened, tries to secure itself through systems, money, records, authority on paper. That was where she believed she was untouchable. She had always told him numbers were confusing, paperwork was stressful, that trusting her was easier. Over time, she had turned access into ownership and responsibility into obedience. What she didn't realize was that systems leave trails, and trails don't care who feels powerful. I approached the finances the same way I approached everything else, gently. No accusations, no demands, just curiosity framed as responsibility. I suggested organizing documents for emergencies. I asked if we should keep copies, in case something happens. Each request sounded reasonable, even caring. She agreed because control likes to appear competent, and competence likes documentation. That was the opening. I began to see how deep it went. Accounts opened in his name that he had never seen. Passwords changed without consent. Automatic transfers justified as household management. Credit inquiries he didn't authorize. Emails sent to employers and service providers written in his voice, but crafted by her hand. It wasn't chaos, it was structure. A system built to remove choice while maintaining plausible deniability. I saved everything. I didn't just collect statements, I compared them. I matched dates with arguments, withdrawals with punishments, deposits with reconciliation. When she was angry, money moved. When she was afraid of being exposed, gifts appeared. Patterns formed like fingerprints. This wasn't mismanagement, it was control quantified. She grew bolder as she sensed her authority slipping. She justified decisions more aggressively, explaining things no one had questioned. That anxiety pushed her into mistakes. She forwarded emails she shouldn't have. She referenced conversations that hadn't happened. She signed documents electronically without realizing metadata doesn't lie. Each slip added weight. I reached out quietly to a financial advisor under the pretense of long-term planning. I didn't reveal everything. I asked hypothetical questions. If someone moved funds without consent, what would that be considered? The answers were calm, professional, and devastating. I documented those too, not opinions, but definitions. At the same time, I pieced together the identity manipulation. She had spoken for him for so long that others assumed it was normal. I found messages sent to friends canceling plans he'd never agreed to cancel. Emails to family reframing conflicts to isolate him further. A message to his employer explaining a personal issue that conveniently reduced his responsibilities and his autonomy. Each message carried his name. None carried his voice. That mattered. I compiled everything into a timeline. Not dramatic, not emotional, clean, clear, undeniable. Anyone could read it and reach the same conclusion without being told what to think. Abuse relies on confusion. Evidence relies on clarity. There were moments she sensed something shifting. She accused me of mistrust. I apologized for the feeling, not the fact. She demanded reassurance. I gave her transparency instead. That frustrated her more than refusal ever could. She wanted submission, not equality. The more she tried to tighten her grip through documentation and authority, the more she revealed how much of it was built on deception. Control had always been her language. Paper just translated it. I made backups in places she would never think to look. I shared limited, careful pieces with people who could recognize their significance. Nothing explosive, just enough to establish credibility, if the story ever needed to be told. I wasn't preparing for a fight. I was preparing for reality. By the time she realized her systems were no longer hers alone, the damage was already done. The financial web she'd spun to trap someone else had wrapped around her instead. Every signature, every transfer, every forged word now pointed in one direction. She had believed control meant safety. She had believed paperwork meant power. What she learned too late was that truth has its own structure. And once built, it doesn't collapse quietly, it stands. The exposure didn't arrive with shouting or slammed doors. It came softly, almost politely, which made it impossible to dismiss. By the time the truth surfaced, it had already taken root in too many places to be pulled out. That was the part she never anticipated. She believed power collapsed only when attacked. She never considered what would happen if it were simply revealed. The dinner was her idea. She wanted witnesses, reassurance, proof that she was still admired and in control. She invited her parents, her sister, a couple of close friends, people whose opinions mattered to her. I agreed immediately, which surprised her. Compliance still felt like victory to her, even though she could sense something slipping. She mistook my calm for surrender. I prepared carefully, not theatrically. I didn't rehearse speeches or plan confrontations. I organized documents, audio files, timelines. I chose only what was necessary. Truth doesn't need everything, it needs enough. The evening began normally. Laughter, small talk, compliments about the house, the food, the life she had curated. She basked in it, posture relaxed, confidence restored. Then, as she always did, she tried to assert dominance. A comment about my incompetence, framed as humor. A reminder of how much she handled, for me. The kind of public belittling she relied on to reinforce the hierarchy. This time, no one laughed. I didn't argue, I didn't defend myself. I calmly said, I think there may be some misunderstandings about how things work, and asked if everyone would mind hearing something. The tone mattered. Not accusatory, not emotional. Curious, reasonable. She froze. I played a short audio clip, her voice unmistakable, threatening consequences if didn't comply. I stopped it quickly. No dramatics, just enough. I followed with a printed timeline, dates, actions, outcomes. Financial transfers aligned with conflicts. Messages sent in his name that he hadn't written. Definitions from professionals, not judgments from me. The room changed. Her parents didn't interrupt. Her sister's face tightened with recognition. One friend asked a quiet, clarifying question. Another asked to see a document more closely. This wasn't a spectacle. It was a realization spreading in real time. She reacted exactly as expected. First denial, then outrage, then tears. She accused me of betrayal, of manipulation, of twisting things out of context. But every accusation required proof she didn't have. Every defense collapsed under its own contradictions. The louder she became, the smaller her position looked. Control fails when it has to explain itself. I didn't press. I didn't add more. I answered questions when asked. I corrected errors calmly. I let the evidence exist without interpretation. People don't like being told what to think, but they resent being lied to even more. By the end of the night, no one was on her side, not openly, not privately. They didn't rush to comfort her. They didn't scold me. They sat with the discomfort of understanding they had missed something important for a very long time. I packed a bag after everyone left. I didn't make a scene. I left a letter on the counter, measured, final. It stated boundaries, not blame. It acknowledged harm without inviting debate. It said I was done participating in a dynamic that required my silence to survive. She didn't chase me. Not that night. The fallout was slow and devastating. Questions from work, quiet distance from family. Legal consultations that didn't go the way she expected. The systems she'd used to control someone else were now being examined by people who didn't fear her. Her authority dissolved not because she lost everything at once, but because she lost credibility everywhere. That's when she understood. Reputation isn't destroyed by exposure. It's destroyed by consistency, and the truth had been consistent for a very long time. By the time 3 months passed, she wasn't asking for control anymore. She was asking to be spared. 3 months was enough time for desperation to replace pride, enough time for consequences to stop feeling theoretical and start feeling permanent. By then, the world she had built on authority and fear had narrowed to a few rooms, a few conversations, a few people willing to listen without immediately pulling away. That was when the knock came. It was early evening, the kind of quiet hour when life feels settled. My brother and I had rebuilt small routines, shared meals, long walks, conversations that didn't end in apologies. He laughed more easily now. He slept through the night. He no longer checked his phone with dread. Healing didn't arrive all at once, but it arrived steadily, like light filling a room that had been kept dark for too long. When I opened the door, she stood there with him beside her. She looked smaller, not physically, but internally, as if the certainty that once filled her had leaked out slowly and left her hollow. Her posture was careful. Her voice, when she spoke, carried none of the sharpness it once had. She said my brother's name the way people do when they want to sound familiar without having earned it. They didn't start with apologies. They started with explanations. Life had been hard. Things had spiraled. She had been misunderstood. Stress had made her act out. He nodded along, eyes downcast, repeating phrases that sounded practiced. They spoke about therapy, about change, about love rediscovered through loss. They spoke about family. I listened, not silently, attentively. I asked clarifying questions. I let pauses stretch. I watched the way she spoke for him, the way he deferred without noticing. Even now, standing on the outside, the dynamic tried to reassert itself. Control doesn't disappear just because it's exposed. It adapts, it softens its voice, it learns new language. They asked if he would come back, just to talk, just to try. They promised boundaries. They promised transparency. They promised everything that had once been demanded of him, now offered as a gift. 3 months ago, those words might have cracked him. Now, he looked at me first. That glance mattered more than anything else in the room. It wasn't fear. It wasn't permission-seeking. It was grounding, a silent check in between two people who had survived the same storm from different sides. He nodded once, steadying himself, and turned back to them. He said no, not angrily, not dramatically. He said it plainly, as if stating a fact that didn't require defense. He said he wasn't ready. He said he didn't trust promises made under pressure. He said he needed distance to stay well. She tried again, this time directly to me. She spoke about forgiveness, about how holding on to anger only poisons the holder, about how everyone deserves a second chance. She framed it as wisdom, as maturity, as moral high ground. It was almost convincing. Almost. I told her something she hadn't heard before. Regret isn't the same as change. I told her that consequences aren't cruelty, they're information. I told her that love doesn't begin after exposure, it exists before it's tested. And I told her that no one was obligated to return to a place that taught them how to disappear. She cried then. Real tears, or close enough that it didn't matter. For a moment, I saw what she wanted me to see, a woman undone, humbled, desperate to undo the past. But I also saw what she didn't want me to see, the calculation, the fear of being alone with her choices, the desire to restore what had served her. I wished her well. That was it. No lecture. No punishment. Just a boundary, stated clearly and held without apology. They left quietly. Inside, my brother sat down heavily, like he'd just finished lifting something he'd carried for years. He didn't look relieved or triumphant. He looked free. There was a difference. Revenge had never been the goal. Not the loud kind, anyway. There were no ruined lives, no public shaming beyond what the truth naturally caused. What changed was power, where it lived, who held it, who no longer needed permission to exist fully. The greatest consequence wasn't that she lost him. It was that he found himself. He learned that love doesn't require shrinking. That peace isn't something you negotiate for. That dignity doesn't come from being chosen after being broken. It comes from choosing yourself before that happens again. As for me, I learned something too. Stepping into someone else's suffering doesn't make you a savior. It makes you a witness. And sometimes, being a witness, calm, prepared, unmovable, is enough to change the outcome. We closed the door together that night. And for the first time, neither of us felt like we were leaving something behind.